today we're going to be talking about how to build secure access control as a startup. So access control is a very important topic as it's a common vector used by attackers when trying to get into a network and when to escalate privileges within a network as well. So I'm going to start off with talking about the uncomfortable truth. So most access risk builds quietly. So you start a company, let's say there's 3 or 4 of you, you're wearing multiple hats, and you end up giving more access than you need. So I'm going to go back and start off with access. So access is, access to files, access to permissions. So let's say on the payroll system, there are 2 or 3 people that have the ability to approve payroll. Could be online banking, could be SaaS tools. Access to multiple tools as a startup is very, very common. So when I say access, I'm talking about standard access and then elevated access. So the access that allows you to do what we call super admin. So whether it's making big decisions, making massive changes, revoking access, those sort of things. People get access faster than it is reviewed. So in comparison to a traditional network or a traditional organization, there's a lot more governance, there's a lot more structure in terms of gaining access to things like, for example, requesting access via a ticket or via a portal and then having a manager approve it. Compared to in a startup, it's likely that it's given quite informally, there's no real record keeping, and there's almost no record of the amount of access that has been built up over time. And then moving on to the next one, old access often stays after roles change. So let's say you start hiring more people, so you're not wearing as many hats as before, but you still retain that access, or you move into another part of the business. Let's say you've moved from finance to marketing, but you still have your finance permissions. As startups, it's very common to do that, but these behaviors are dangerous in terms of attack. If an attacker was to gain access to your system, before you know it, they've got access to 2, 3, 4, 5 systems. And if there's no governance in place to check that access is being revoked on time, then it's going unchecked. An attacker could live in your system for a long period of time or do damage very, very quickly in a short period of time. Admin access can spread without ownership. So like I said before, you might have casually given access to multiple people based on the activities they needed to carry out, but there's not necessarily any accountability in terms of who has access to what level of access do they have, and is there a business need for it. So generally we want to exercise least privilege, give people the least amount of information they need or the least amount of access they need in order to do their jobs. And then access control fails when nobody owns the life cycle. So lack of ownership always equals lack of accountability. If there's no formal ownership associated with the process or with an activity, it's generally not going to be managed effectively. Why this matters for startups. So startups add tools, users, vendors, and contractors quickly. You're scaling rapidly, you want to get your minimum viable product, you want to make sure that your business is viable financially. But then sometimes for the need of speed, you skip over these governance processes that are very important for preventing attack and for recovering from attack. Access is often granted informally to keep moving. So again, for the benefit of speed, granting someone access rather than going through a manual process or going through the ticketing process. Sensitive data can spread across SaaS platforms. So if you haven't got proper segregation in terms of who has access to what, so rather than making sure that people have the minimum amount of information to do their jobs, you're giving everyone access to it. So if there's any commercially sensitive information, you're giving it to the entire organization rather than a subset of people. One weak account can create business, client, or data risk. So using the example of an attacker, let's say an individual is recycling their passwords, so using multiple passwords for their emails, for their SaaS tools, let's say Slack or something like that, and then an attacker is to get into their email, and then they try the password across multiple SaaS tools. All of a sudden they have access to not only the information in the email system, they have the SaaS tools and all the information associated. So that one account that is weak or that one account that has more access than it needs has created a widespread problem. And then secure access control protects trust, delivery, and growth. You want your customers to have trust in you and to have confidence in you. If you're subject to access control related attacks, it's not good look in terms of reputation, and it's disruptive as a business. As a startup, you want to focus on the activities that are going to grow your business and grow your revenue. And not looking after access control is a way to distract from that. So the access control foundation, identity. So who is the user, guest, admin, service, or workload? So in startups, it's common to have, let's say, a user, so like a standard user, and then within that user, there's also like very elevated privileges. In an ideal world, you'd separate that out. So you'd have a normal user for day-to-day activities, and then for the admin access, you'd have a separate one. So let's say John Smith, standard user, John Smith privileged user. That's like an example of that. In a similar way, there's often a lot of shared accounts when it comes to startups. Shared accounts are a no, because if an account is shared, you don't know if someone is you don't know, first of all, you don't know who's doing what, and then secondary to that, if there's an attacker also using a tool alongside the rest of the team, you'll have no idea because there's not individual accountability. So for example, if you know that John Smith has a privileged account and he works Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and you see him online on a Sunday at 11 p.m, it's easy to ask one person and ask, was that you? Compared to if it's an account that the 24/7 team uses, it will appear to be normal behavior. So it's a way of flagging behavior as well. So it's not about not trusting a team. It's about understanding who is going in and out, what is normal behavior. It helps you build a profile of normal behavior for your staff. Next, role. So define what access is needed for a role, business, or process. So earlier I mentioned that startups often wear, like let's say people in startups often wear multiple hats. That's understandable and there's nothing wrong with that. But even if person A, let's say Janet, is conducting 3 different roles, stack her access according to the individual job functions. So let's say she's running finance, she's doing a bit of marketing, and she's doing a bit of HR, as an example. Split those activities into roles and define the access that each role needs. So you're almost dragging and dropping the access into Janet's world. And then if, let's say, she hands off the HR activities, you can revoke the HR related activities. Often they're kind of like clusters of access. There's going to be like the baseline access that everyone in the business needs, and then the additional or specialized access based on role that you can like stack on top of that. That's very, very important when it comes to managing access control and revoking access in a timely basis. Context, so check device, location, risk, session, and sensitivity. So this is about conditional access. So conditional access is the concept of considering multiple factors before giving access. So who is asking for access? Do they have the authority? Based on their role, and then context. So let's say you have a London-based team member. Let's use Janet as the example again. Janet is based in London. As far as you know, she's not traveling. She logged in at 9 a.m. and then at 9:45, you get a ping from a country 1,000 miles away. It's impossible for Janet to have traveled that far, and you can raise the flag. If it was a shared account, let's say it's a account that the team all over the world is using, it's harder for you to narrow it down in the same way and be confident that you've made the right choice to revoke access. Conditional access is, I think, it's the gold standard. I've got a blog about it on my website as well, just exploring the best ways to deploy access control models. But yeah, next, approval. So control who can grant, change, or remove access. It's for per resource or per, let's say, SaaS tool, it's important to have one owner who's responsible for reviewing access. So someone that understands the tool enough and works with the tool enough to have a look at the list of people at a regular interval. So if it's very, very sensitive, I say, let's say weekly up until quarterly if it's something that's not as sensitive. But yeah, they should be able to look at the list and say, yeah, that person has reason to use it, that person has reason to use it, because in startups, it's common for you to have a genuine business reason initially to use it. So let's say it's Christmas party season, you're making a lot of bookings, so you've been given temporary access to approving expenses or something like that. But then once that period of time lapses, you need to have the access removed. So that's that's also something that needs to be kept on top of. And then review, what I mentioned before, so checking access before it becomes a permanent risk. If it's got really, really high risk, check it more often. If it's mid-level risk, you can drop to, let's say, every 6 months. If it's reasonably low risk, then you can say quarterly or something like that. But make sure that the level of effort you put into managing the access control reflects the level of data. So whether it's public, whether it's highly sensitive data, PII data, kind of align it to that to make sure that you're making choices that are balanced. Step 1, know what people can access. So list out your key systems, your tools, your files, your data stores. You can split this up in terms of departments. So you can have different people in the business split up and list out the key systems. Then identify who has standard, elevated, and admin access. So standard would be you have the ability to read, write, maybe make some edits. Elevated, so let's say it's a file, you have the ability to add people to view the file, so to grant people access. And then admin access, you can delete, you can create new file shares. So just make sure that you review what's there already, and then at that stage, if you realize that some things are a bit excessive or not necessary, or it was granted as a one-off but it's no longer needed, make that choice then. Separate internal users, guests, vendors, and service accounts. This is really important because a lot of businesses have organizations that come in and render services, and you need to make sure that you're separating out internal users, whether it's permanent or contractors, to guest users. Guest users, vendors, for example, should be having temporary access. They shouldn't have standing access to your systems. So make sure that you've differentiated between those two. You want to get quite... This is the bit that you spend the most time on, because you want to go through and make sure that you define the level of access each person to have. So standard access for an internal user versus standard access for a guest versus a vendor. I like to put things in table form. Create a table and list standard versus or access types versus users, and then that will kind of help you. It'll make it clear to you, but there should be significant differences between each of them. And then flag systems that contain sensitive data or client data. The reason we want to do that is that those are almost like your crown jewels. So client data, there's reputational damage. Sensitive data, that could be personally identifiable information. There's regulatory risk associated with that, so you want to take extra care. And then you cannot control access you cannot see. If you don't know about either the system or the file share or whatever it is, so let's say there's shadow IT, there are tools that are being used that you don't know about, you're not going to be able to control the access. So that is, it's almost like an open window in a multiple, like say like a 5-bed mansion. It's an open window, an opportunity that an attacker can see or an attacker can use that you're not aware of. Define access by role. So in this table form, map out the access that should be given by role. So go by function, go by activity, get very, very detailed, because these are going to serve as templates as you move into the standardization process. So access should match the work someone needs to do. So you've got your baseline access that everyone in the company has, and on top of that, you'll have the role-based access. So this is role-based access control. Avoid giving everyone broad access by default. So if you're unsure, be a bit conservative. It's going to be a bit disruptive in the interim. But then once people request access, let's say 6 people in the finance team or 3 people in the finance team have requested access to a certain system, then that tells you that should probably be included within there. But as part of this, you should be speaking to people across the business to help shape that overall. So it shouldn't be too bad, but it's just a bit of a painful thing to do initially just to get everything set up. And then create simple role groups for common responsibilities. So try not to think too much about like the one-off activities, the standardized day-to-day, weekly activities, fortnightly activities, include that as a standard. And then keep admin access separate from daily work access. So as the example I gave earlier, you'll have your standardized user accounts, and then on top of that, you have your privileged access account. So whether it's something you do weekly, monthly, but there's like an enhanced... there's like elevated privileges, so a high risk activity. So for example, I'll give the example of expenses. So an account that you're able to disperse funds or grant expenses or something like that. Something like that should be almost under lock and key. So the best example I give is that let's say you're in a corporate building and there's a vault. You need to access the vault, let's say once or twice a day. So rather than attaching it to your set of keys, each time you need to use the key, you go to reception, you sign out the key, you write what the reason is that you need the key for, and then you use the vault key and then you return it back. So that is what we call just-in-time access. And it's really, really helpful for privileged access, because if you lost that your normal set of keys, let's say in the street, at least if an attacker enters the building, they're not going to get into the vault. That's the best way to describe it. But yeah, making sure that you're not losing everything at once. Okay, and then role clarity. makes access easier for everyone to approve and renew. So making sure that roles are clearly defined as much as you can. If they evolve over time, that's fine, but just have an initial understanding of what roles and responsibilities are associated with a specific job. Apply least privilege. So as mentioned before, give people the minimum level of access needed for the task. So it's the equivalent of giving people the keys to the office, the front door, the very minimum amount they need. Everyone doesn't need access to the vault. There's no need for that. And then avoid permanent privileged access. So going back to the example of the keys, no one needs to have the vault key on their individual key sets. They can borrow the key as they need. And then with that is time-bound access. So rather than having access to the vault on a permanent basis, you sign in the key, you sign it back out, and then after that you've returned it. So there's no risk of you losing the key. Then remove access when the business need ends. Let's say you're working on a specific piece of work and you need access, like let's say a client file. So you're working on a particular project for 3 months. At the end of the 3 months, your access to that file share is revoked because you no longer need it. And then least privilege reduces the blast radius of mistakes. So going back to the key example, if you have a set of keys that has every single room within the office plus the vault, if you're to leave that set of keys, an attacker can come in overnight, access every single thing, compared to if you have a reduced set of keys, you've got 1 or 2 keys that you need. It's a much better situation in the case of like a robbery or an attack. 4, control joiners, movers and leavers. This is a key area for mistakes. So people that join an organization is probably like the least risky, as long as they're being granted access to just the minimum they need. So new joiners need access based on a role. So based on the previous steps, you would have created this already. You would have given created a template for each role. So you grant them the access they need based on their role plus the baseline access. And then let's say after 6 months or after a year, they move from finance to marketing. The expectation with the movers process is that you revoke every single piece of finance related access. So you take all of that away and then you add just the new marketing access. That's the expectation. If you fail to do that and they have both you need to do it on a timely basis as well. If they have both marketing and finance, that is exposing the business to risk, because if an attacker was to hijack an account, if an attacker was to hijack an account, they have way more access than they need, and the blast radius is wider. The level of damage they can do because they have more keys is higher. And then leavers, once someone has left the business, or once you're aware that someone is leaving the business, you should trigger a process to start revoking their access. My rule of thumb is 4 p.m. So 4 p.m, assuming they work a 9 to 5, 4 p.m, they should have all their access revoked. And it should be done by ticket form. It should be easy to audit. It should be coordinated. So the manager of the leaver should be in charge of that, making sure the access is all revoked, equipment is returned in a timely manner, arrangements have been made. Because again, let's say in a SaaS world where there's a lot of SaaS tools, someone can still either the individual that's left or someone else could log in to the system post leaving. That's not what we want. We want to make sure that as soon as someone leaves the business, their access is terminated. This is a key weakness that I always see. There's always a time lag in the time it takes between an individual leaving and their access being revoked. And then movers, they have a lot of escalation creep. So they have their previous roles access even though they've left a particular department. And then contractors and vendors, they need expiry dates. So if you know that it's a fixed term 6-month contract, 3-month contract, set up the access so that after that date the access is revoked. It's better to reinstate an expired access. So let's say they are extended or they're staying for longer. It's better to reinstate it than to have it open-ended. So here, life cycle control prevents stale or forgotten access. Anything, a dormant account represents risk. Anything that we're not intending to monitor is something that an attacker could take over and use for malicious intent. Number 5, protect privileged access. So admin accounts should be named and traceable. So no shared accounts, no unnamed accounts. keep the naming convention simple. So let's say John Smith privileged account. That's plenty. So we know exactly what it's used for. We know why it exists, and if we wanted to find out who has been using it, it is easy to do that. Privileged access should require stronger checks, so there should be a workflow that requires, let's say, 2 people to approve it, just to make sure that it's not something that could be easily manipulated by, let's say, an attacker. Let's say an attacker has hijacked 2 sets of accounts. We don't want it to be easy for them to work their way through the system. So having a workflow with robust checks is always important. Shared admin accounts should be removed or tightly controlled. So bringing in a tool like CyberArk, for example, if you cannot help using a shared account, so there's a level of accountability, or password rotation to increase the strength of privileged access. Critical actions should be logged and reviewed, so there needs to be a business reason for why something is being done. And lastly, admin access should be treated as high risk access. So based on the activity, the level of damage that can be done using a particular account, that should make it classed as high risk access. Review access regularly. So there needs to be a routine for checking access. So access reviews is about checking the level of access that people have and checking if it's appropriate. So like I said, if someone has moved teams, or there's no longer a need to, do a process manually or something like that. Let's say a new tool has been brought in to replace that. We need to reflect that. So making sure you're checking on a regular basis. To me, regular means that you're matching it to the level of risk. So if it's a super high risk activity, that should be done weekly or monthly. If it's mid-range, I'd say about monthly to quarterly. If it's not so high risk, so literally access to Slack, access to Word, etc., then you can make it every 6 months or once a year. But the idea is that you need to be going in regularly depending on the level of risk or the level of damage that can be done. But to add to that, I would say with the joiners, movers, leavers process, every single month you should be checking who joiners are less of a problem, just making sure they have the access that has been agreed upon based on job roles. And then movers and your leavers, those are your high risk. So you should be checking every single time someone leaves. You should be going through the tickets and making sure that their access has been revoked on a timely basis. And if it hasn't been revoked, you need to investigate why and continue to audit it on a regular basis. If you've got a lot to do in terms of leavers, you can start off with sampling, but I think there's nothing wrong with going through line by line and checking. System owners should validate access, not IT. So IT have their role in terms of maybe granting or revoking access, but the system owner is best placed, the person that understands the tool, understands the business use for it, and understands how others need to use the tool. I think they're best placed to do that. And then, like I said before, high-risk systems need more frequent reviews, so whether that's a weekly basis or high-risk activities like joint movers and leavers. Remove access that can't be justified. It's better to revoke someone's access and then they request it again when they need it, as opposed to just leaving it permanently available. And then access review turns hidden risk into visible action. So if you find out that there's a time lag in revoking access for leavers or movers, or if high-risk systems have permanent access assigned, that gives you actions to do in terms of reducing the risk. So questions to the founders. Who has access to customer data? So of all the people that have access to customer data, is it justified in every instance? Who can change payment, domain, and admin settings? So whether it's the website, whether it's payroll, who has the ability to make changes in these ways? And is every person justified in that? Who still has access after leaving or changing roles? Which vendors or guests can access business systems? And then what access could create the biggest damage if misused? So for example, the website, if there's unnecessary admin access to the website, or there isn't change control associated with the website, how much impact is that going to have on your operations? So weak versus secure access control. So weak access control is shared admin accounts. Those are a no-no. Access that is never reviewed, no joiner or leaver process, too many permanent privileges, so people can do way more than they need to, no clear system owner, no owner means no accountability. And then secure access control is named accounts, so we know exactly who's using it and we can monitor for anomalous behavior. Regular access reviews, whether weekly, monthly, quarterly, every 6 months. Clear lifestyle process. The process is understood and it's followed, and it's also audited. Least privileged access, people have the minimum amount of information or access to resource to allow them to do their job. And then owner approved changes. The system owner is the decider of access. The access control model. So the first step is to request access. So you request access and you should have normally it's like a form. You can design it in any way you wish, but you start off with a form and say, this is the access you'd like, this is the resource you'd like access to, and then this is the business reason for it. And then if necessary, you can say, this is the period of time in which I need access to it. Next, approve. The right owner approve based on the role and the risk. It's possible that the system owner can have a look and say, actually, I'm going to give you access, but I'm going to reduce the scope so it's only a week or it's only a day. And rather than giving admin access, they're going to give you a very specific function based on what you need it for. And then grant access is provisioned with least privilege controls. You have the minimum amount of information or access required to complete the activity you need to complete. And then review, access is removed, changed or renewed before it becomes stale. So we're always going in and we're checking to make sure that the level of access control is complete and appropriate for the task being done. Access controls to prioritize first. Named account for every user. There should not be any mystery accounts. You should know who exactly is using each account and why they are using it. Multi-factor authentication on key systems and admin accounts. So whether that's the Authenticator app or one-time passcode or phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. Clear owner for each critical system. This is a must. That's probably right at the top of the list. The joiner, mover and leaver checklist. So as people graduate throughout the JML lifecycle, making sure that the activities or the tasks associated is completed in a timely manner. And then quarterly access review for high-risk systems. Again, depending on your capacity, depending on how much or how critical it is to the business, you can adjust that. That could easily become weekly, but make it manageable for you. And then what secure access control creates? So you're going to have clear ownership over business systems. You're going to be very clear about who is held accountable for each thing. So let's say you go in and do an audit and you find that system A has some weaknesses or things to be improved upon. You have an assigned person to work on those weaknesses. Lower risk of stale or excessive access. So an attacker is less able to hijack dormant accounts and do damage with them. Better protection for customer and client data. So you're making sure that only the necessary individuals within your business have access to their data, which is good in terms of breach, like it's reducing the chances of a breach. Faster response when someone leaves or changes role. You know exactly what to do. The process has been practiced and well established. Stronger readiness for client and investor questions. So let's say you're at a funding round and you're being asked questions about cybersecurity. You can say, even if you're not certified to any standards, you can say you're adhering to best practice for access control, and you can give examples of the JML lifecycle, for example, or privileged access. So your investors or clients are confident that you're looking after their data. So the real test is, if someone left the business tomorrow, would you know exactly what access to remove? So if a finance assistant left tomorrow, would you know exactly which systems they had access to as of their time of leaving? One, because there's evidence of it, or two, because you have established processes and you know you're following them. And how quickly would you be able to revoke all their access before they leave? Secure access control is business protection. I think it's one of the most important parts of cybersecurity, restricting the level of damage an attacker can do. I've got a number of products. That are targeted at access control. So in the layer 1 startup security toolkit, there's an entire module that is based on laying the foundation. So this is about access for roles, setting up the templates, establishing the processes for making sure that people are aware of the access they should have. And then for layer 2, this is a step up. This is more to do with the governance. So it prioritizes the gaps you might have, making sure there's ownership for everything. And it just turns it more operational compared to the layer 1 toolkit. Those are both available in my bio for purchase. And then if you would like to have a consultation to discuss your specific needs, or you want more bespoke advice, I also have consultations. So those will also be listed in the bio. And yeah, that's everything I have for today. Thank you so much for listening.